My name is Kyle Loder, and my favorite thing is Warhammer 40k.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome back to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones. It is Sunday, I think June 6th. Spidey is on top of my calendar, so I can't double check. I am coming to you the morning after my first in-person synagogue event. First, one without timed entry, where we got to hug each other. What a wonderful experience. We did Havdalah last night on the lake with maybe 60 or 70 people came. And it was just really wonderful. I really, really loved it. And so this morning I'm just kind of glowing in the, hangover, the emotional hangover of having run a hybrid event outdoors. The technology worked okay. The technology for people on the lawn was great. The technology for people watching on YouTube was less great, but it was a successful first go of the hybrid experience. This week, my nephew Andy drove cross country from Idaho to Chicago and is staying with me for the summer while he figures out what Chicago neighborhood really speaks to him. And that is really exciting to get to spend time together and help him get settled in Chicago. Other than that, it was like a cool spring again, and now it is summer with a capital SUMMER. They're all caps. It's in the 90s. So today's task is getting those window units in so that things get to a more comfortable temperature in the apartment. This week on the podcast, we've got Kyle Loder. He is not Kurt Loder's son or grandson. I checked. Kyle is someone I know from the Doughboys fan community, and we are talking about his podcast, but mostly about a tabletop game called Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer 40k. When we stopped recording the other night, he said, "Now, Leah, you're going to find that you have someone who plays Warhammer 40k in every social group you have. They just don't talk to you about it because they don't know they know that you don't know about it." And I hung up that Zoom and I went to a synagogue Zoom, and somebody said, what podcast episode were you recording? I said Warhammer 40k. And the person chairing the meeting said, "Oh, my son and I just watched a 3-hour Twitch about how this particular army plays." And then a former neighbor came by yesterday to pick up a game, and he had accidentally had delivered here. And I said, "Oh, I've got this podcast I'm doing about Warhammer 40k." And he's like, "Oh yeah, at Gen Con they take over 5 rooms and they do this and that." So it does seem like Kyle was right. There are Warhammer 40k folks everywhere I turn. And you don't have to be into tabletop war games to appreciate his explanation of how this game works. And what all those little pewter statues were about, those little pewter and plastic models were about that you might have seen in friends' rooms, but never known what movie they attached to. They were about Warhammer. So without any further ado, stay safe, protect the people around you, and keep finding your favorite things. Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and we get recommendations without using an algorithm. This week, we continue my tour of the Discord, which is the Discord community of the Doughboys podcast, and all the great people I've met there. And I am really pleased to welcome Kyle Loder. Kyle is the host of A New Low and Who Does a Podcast, and he is not, I already verified it, the son of Kurt Loder. Kyle, how are you doing tonight?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me on. I will point out, I should have corrected you before. I'm the co-host of both of those shows, so it's not just me. So if any of my co-hosts listen to this, they'll probably get very mad if I did not say that. So
I'll send them the screenshot in my own font that says that I wrote that you were the host.
It was my fault for not saying that before.
Yeah. Now, I know that Who Does a Podcast is your Hamilton podcast.
Yes.
But what is A New Low?
So A New Low spanned from 5 of us that were fans of a different podcast called The After Disaster. We all just kind of, some of us knew each other and some of us didn't, but we all basically over the pandemic started doing weekly Zoom recordings. Well, not recordings, weekly Zoom, just like chats, like hangout chats on Fridays. Someone set it up, a few more people came in, and it was rocking and rolling over the pandemic. And a few of us were like, we kind of like the banter, we kind of like, some of us are funny, maybe some of us aren't, but a bunch of us just decided to start doing a weekly podcast, see where that could go. And we somehow stumbled into creating a podcast network. It just kind of happened.
Wow.
So yeah, we started A New Low. We just actually did our 53rd episode this week.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Last week was the 1-year anniversary. So that's what we started with. And then me and Joe, who was also on A New Low, once we saw Hamilton in July when it dropped on Disney Plus, we just kept talking about it, and we would bring it up on like the Zooms. Everyone would get mad because they didn't care. So we're like, all right, fine. We'll just make our own podcast then.
I love it.
And then we're like, okay, I guess we'll call it A New Low Network. And then someone started a sports show. And we also have like 2 lady neurosciences have a neuroscience show. So yeah, we have 4 podcasts somehow on this network that we started a year ago. I don't know how it happened. It just kind of, the ball got rolling.
That's outstanding. And you're all people that know each other from like fan communities and online, or does anybody live or work in proximity to each other?
Basically, everyone just knows each other from this fan community. It's pretty crazy.
I just love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And then on your Hamilton podcast,
of course,
you and Joe have been 1 week at a time going through every song. You talk about the song, what happens. You bring in historical facts that people might not have learned about. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit, because you know that I am a very big Hamilton fan.
Yes, indeed. Between the 3 of us, me, Joe, and you are the only person who's actually seen the play. So that's one thing to point out.
I'm a single woman without kids, and Hamilton was in Chicago for 3 years. So
there you go.
I had some opportunities.
Yeah, you had chances.
So what has that been like to spend, like almost a year there as well, like going through this musical?
Yeah. So just to say where I am on that, there are 46 songs officially on the soundtrack. We just did episode 45 this week, so we got 1 song left. Ugh. So we started it basically end of July, I guess, like maybe 3 weeks after it dropped on Disney Plus, and we just went for it. We're like, are we going to get sick of this? Is this a bad idea? But we're not. We're not sick of it. It's crazy. It's been 46 weeks of this thing, and we could probably start over at one again the week after, which we won't. But yeah, like we always find something new to talk about. Like I have so much of a bigger appreciation of it now, obviously. Like when you spend 1 week analyzing one song, you might think like, oh man, you're going to get sick of it, but there's just so much to talk about with everything. There's
so much in there. And especially I think what's really special for you guys is that you have the Disney recording to go back to.
Yes.
Instead of just the Broadway recording and your memory.
Exactly. Yeah. I couldn't imagine like when it was in its height and it was only on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And then the soundtrack came out, and the soundtrack was like the best-selling album for like a month because everyone who'd seen it wanted to get it, and a bunch of people who hadn't seen it wanted to get it. So it's like, oh, now I can hear those songs again. But yeah, I found it at the perfect time of obviously when it's available to watch and available to listen to whenever I wanted.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the podcast spanned is like, I kept listening to the soundtrack or picking out certain songs, and then me and Joe would argue about what song's best, because we actually did a 1 to 46 ranking before we started. Each of us did a ranking, and then each episode we reveal where we had it, so we can argue about that. We can say, oh, this is going to come up now, because 4 months later, I've heard the soundtrack another 200 times or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I like this song so much more, it would definitely be higher. So like every episode's very interesting about like where we even are listening to it and
so
how it's evolved. So do you
think your ranking, when you did week 1 and you rank 1 to 46, and you had to do it in week 46, is it a different order?
Yes, we are doing a 47th episode where we are re-ranking every song. Yes. That will be our real last episode.
No, it's not a spoiler.
No, we've talked about
it yet.
No, we've mentioned it on the show that we are doing, like, this will be higher in the re-rank or this will be lower in the re-rank. So, yeah, we plan to do that. It was probably not even that far in. We're like, we got to do a re-rank show. We're like, when we see where they go.
There's this, so I'm Jewish, and there's this idea in Judaism, it's not even an idea. Every year we read the Torah and we read it again because the words in the Torah don't change, but you change, and how you approach it changes. And I think when you look at a Broadway show like Hamilton or Cats, even though Cats gets a lot of hate, it's a beautiful show. Right. Dear Evan Hansen, when you look at a full Broadway cast recording or full album, you can come to it every year and you bring new experiences to you, and it's going to move you in different ways. So I love that you guys are returning to your ranking and returning again. Yeah,
that's definitely built in. We're doing that.
Are you guys going to do an In the Heights episode?
So we're talking about a season 2 of watching a different play. We're trying to figure out what's really available because we want other people to be able to see it too.
Yeah.
So obviously the movie version of In the Heights is coming out. It'll be on HBO Max and theaters, I think. So anyone could really watch it if you have HBO. But yeah, that's a possibility. There's a few things we're kicking around. We haven't decided yet.
That's exciting. Yeah, it is, because there's not that you have to do everything Lin-Manuel, but he is particularly accessible these days.
Yeah, we could do like a 10 episode Moana run if we wanted to.
True. And there's also the I believe he helped with the translations on the new West Side Story.
Okay, cool. I don't doubt it.
I have that in my head, and someone will send us a tweet if we're wrong, I guess. So other than exploring deeply Hamilton, and starting a whole podcast network, have you had any other new hobbies during this COVID shutdown, or has podcasting really gone to the top of the list?
Podcasting has definitely taken up more of my time. I did actually have a podcast before the pandemic, and we ironically ended maybe like a week before everything shut down, like March 2020. Because so it was called Your Parents' Basement. We reviewed a different classic video game every week. So we did over 200 episodes of that. So
oh my gosh.
It was kind of just nearing the end where we're like, maybe we should stop. Like, we could keep going, but like playing a new game every week, even though you didn't play the whole thing and finish it, but like having that on your plate every week and then doing recording, it just kind of run its course. Like, I still love the guys. I talk to them all the time, but we all just kind of like mutually decided, we should probably stop.
Right.
But then COVID happened, and then I met all the other people from the other fan network, and we're like, I guess I'll go back to podcasting.
Yeah.
Now that I have more time.
Yeah.
But really, I didn't find anything new over the pandemic. I just did more of what I'd always done, really.
Nice.
Like watch movies, play video games, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Podcasting, I found myself a few months in, 2 months in, I started recording last Memorial Day.
That's right.
Where I was like, I got 2 hours of every day back from not commuting.
True.
And surely there's something I can do with my time. And so I did this, and this has been, for me, certainly the most fun hobby I picked up during the pandemic, I would say.
That's excellent. Yeah, it's There's ups and downs, of course. You don't always love it, but it's rewarding in the end, for sure.
So, Kyle, I'm curious, what are we here to talk about today?
So it is funny you asked what hobbies I picked up over the pandemic, because there is one big hobby I lost over the pandemic, which was Warhammer 40,000.
Warhammer 40,000.
Also known as 40K, shorthand, Warhammer 40K. This is what's known as a tabletop war game. So you use models to represent like your units and your stuff, and you play against another opponent with their models and stuff, and you roll dice and have a great time. I basically describe it as a really, really complicated board game. So just think of it that way.
Is it a really complicated board game that is one-on-one? Is it a group of like, what's the minimum number of players? What's the maximum number of players?
The minimum is 2. The maximum is however many you can fit on a table. So,
like, if you go to Gen Con and you get a conference room and a massive table, you could have 25 people playing?
Yeah, you could. That's known as like an apocalypse game. So they actually have rules for that kind of thing.
Wow.
Where it's like, we have 20 people. We all just want to throw models on the table and have a great time.
Okay.
So the rules are very flexible. My main focus is one-on-one. I've got my army. You've got your army. We're going to have a game, see who wins.
Okay.
So that's like what's known as more competitive play, like the one-on-one play. There's also like team play. You can do 2-on-2 competitively, or you can say, my team of 5 guys are each going to play one of your 5 guys, and we add the scores up at the end. So there's so many different ways to play, and that's really another thing I like about it is it's very flexible in how you play it.
Okay. So right, it's an in-person game and COVID, and you are literally touching game pieces and moving them around and yelling at each other across the table. So I can see how it's not a great COVID hobby.
One of the most disease-unfriendly games. I mean, there is like, even before COVID, you'd go to a convention or you'd go to a tournament and you'd get con crud. They call it con crud. I mean, they do it at like Comic-Con or any convention, but like you're playing 6 other people, you're across from them for 3 hours at a time, not to mention all the other hundreds of people walking around. You just come up with something. So yeah, it was definitely not the most friendly thing to do over the pandemic.
So let's time travel.
Sure.
And I'm curious, how were you introduced to 40K? Are you first day it was announced, you were like right in line, you're like I bet this is going to be cool, or like how did you find out about it, and how did you come to this game?
Okay, well, the day it was announced, I was 2 years old, so that did not happen.
So you weren't a gamer yet.
Wasn't super into it, probably a choking hazard. But just a little background on the company. So the company is known as Games Workshop. They make all sorts of different games, but their big games are what's known as Warhammer Fantasy, it's now known as Age of Sigmar, and Warhammer 40K. Those are their 2 big flagships. So Fantasy is obviously fantasy battles. It's stuff like elves, orcs, dwarves, things like that, but
so
still
it's
the
things
same
that like march out of the pages of Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. They actually do have a Lord of the Rings game, side note, an officially licensed Lord of the Rings game. But the whole idea is the same. It's models, it's miniatures, it's a table with terrain, you're rolling dice, you're having a great time. Warhammer 40K came around 1987, that dropped, and that is their sci-fi universe. So this is literally the year 40,000. So we're that far into the future.
Oh.
Yeah, that's where the 40,000 comes from.
It's
so
not,
it's just like,
I just thought it was like an army of 40,000. It's a very big army.
That's a good visual.
Very far year.
Yeah, so that's the idea, is it's the year 40,000. Where would humanity be? We've met all these aliens. There's demons from another dimension that come in. All sorts of stuff. So I'm much more of a sci-fi person than a fantasy person, so that always appealed to me. So when I was probably 11 or 12, we had a store in my town called Jester's Playhouse. So I grew up in South Jersey. So this was a store that would sell miniatures and arts and hobby supplies and things like that. And one of my friends went there one day and bought a box of miniatures, and he's like, "Hey guys, I need other people to play this." So we're like, okay. We looked at his stuff. We thought it was cool. We each bought another box, and we weren't playing like real games, but we each had like our 10 guys, and we would start playing. And then we each kind of gradually built our collection up. Maybe at Christmas, we'd get a few more models, and then a month later, we'd all have bigger armies. So yeah, it's really when I started. So this was about, when did I say I was 12? This would be about 97.
Okay.
I'm 35.
Yep.
So that was what's known as 3rd edition of Warhammer 40K. We are now in the 9th edition.
Okay.
So
I'm curious, are those miniatures that you are, because as you're talking, I realize I listened to an episode of The Dork Forest about Warhammer.
That makes sense.
The guest was...
That's Jackie Cation?
It's Jackie Cation. And she had a guest on who played, and his husband painted the miniatures.
Yes.
So when you're 10, 11, 12, are you getting miniatures that are pre-painted, or are you also painting them?
So all of Games
later?
Workshop stuff is not painted. So
Okay.
you have to... So that's another part of the hobby, is it is an actual hobby where you're building and painting models that you then use in the game.
That's really neat.
Yeah, so that's a big aspect of it. So yeah, we're gluing stuff together. Maybe it's not quite together right. We're slapping paint on it. You try to paint inside the lines. Maybe his helmet's a little different, weird color. But yeah, I'm 11 years old painting little models and fighting with them with my friends.
And would you guys paint together too? Or would you paint at home and then you'd show up and you're
It's
like,
funny, we
"Look at
never
my-"
actually did paint together now that
No?
you mention it. Yeah. I would paint in my basement at my mom's house.
Yeah.
Which is probably what everyone imagined I was doing anyway. But yes, the reality was I was in my mom's basement painting little models. But no, we never did paint together. That's funny. Yeah, we just played games.
Cool. So that was, you said, so that's 3rd edition.
Yeah. So then
yeah.
I played probably up until high school when I wanted to try to be cool, so I didn't play anymore.
So you switched to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. No, I still had all my models. I still actually use some of them now, the ones I even painted back then.
Have you repainted any, or do you go with
some
classic
of them I
Kyle?
did. Yeah, some of them I did, but some of them I think I've kept the same. But yeah, so through high school and college, didn't really play, and then after college, I'm my own man now.
Yeah.
I have a job, I have money, and like I think back, I'm like, what if that game's still around? I could probably buy my own models and afford them now. And then so I went back to my mom's house, grabbed all my models, found the local game store near me, and said, "Hey, do you guys play this still?" And it was still around. People played, and then some of the people I met there are still my friends today.
I love it. I love that, because I had my friend Adrian was on to talk about the Sims and different iterations of the Sims. And so, like, in Sims, I don't know, it's on, like, version 5 or something now.
Yeah, I think Sims 5, yeah.
And you buy all these expansion packs, and then version 6 comes out, and everything you've invested in it is worthless. So it's really interesting to me that this company has released multiple editions, but not made your first army people, your first soldiers, obsolete. I think there's something really interesting about that.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it is quite expensive. I'll say that up front. The models are very expensive, but they're very detailed. They're good models, I guess. But it is an investment.
How big is it? Is it like smaller than a Coke can?
Yes. So like an individual dude, obviously we're on video right now.
Yes.
It's maybe like 1.5 inches high.
Okay.
That's like your normal dude. You might have like a squad of 10 of those. You might have 5 squads of that. And then there's actually like vehicles that are a little bigger. Those like monster things that are bigger than that. So they vary in size, but I think it's I forget the scale, like what they call the scale. Like 1 in 35, I don't know.
Okay.
35 millimeter scale. I don't even know what that means, but I've heard that number.
Okay. We'll go
Whatever
with
the
it.
scale is. Yeah. Exactly. But what I want to say is it is an investment where I could use these models for years.
Yeah.
So, yes, new rules come out. You want to buy new models that are better with the rules, but you could use the same stuff for a long time.
So you're out of college. You get them back. You go to your game store, and then are they doing Warhammer nights that you're going to like meet people? Like, how do you
Yep.
how do you open the door to finding people to play a game that, because you're both coming with your armies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that even work? Like, how do you find the people to play?
A lot of this is driven through local game stores, like I said.
Okay.
And Games Workshop actually has their own chain of stores where they just sell their own stuff.
Oh.
So they'll demo the game to people. They have all the products on the wall, that kind of thing. But the local store, the local independent store, it might be a comic shop, it might be a hobby shop, but they'll have Warhammer models. And they'll usually host a weekly open gaming night where they have all their tables set up. The people around the area know to come in every Monday night or whatever.
Okay.
So yeah, when I went there, I don't know what day it was, a Thursday. They said, yeah, on Thursdays, we have our gaming room in the back. Just come and meet people, and that's basically how it happened. And then through them, you meet other people, and then so like I said, my main focus is the competitive scene,
Okay.
which is, so we would actually have tournaments. So one Saturday, we'd play 3 games. Whoever won all their games wins the tournament. They get a store credit or something, you know.
Okay.
Like we all throw in $10.
Right.
Whoever wins gets all of it. So that's really where I made most of my friends, is in the competitive scene, because we would always be talking about, oh, what's the best combo of this? What's the best armor to use here? Here's how you counter this thing. And that's like where a lot of the discussion comes in, is can I make the best army that could beat any other army? So that's really where a lot of my friends from it came from.
So when you go to a tournament,
Mhm.
do you say, this is my army for the tournament, or do you bring all of your pieces and build a new army for every game based on who you're, like, how do you talk me through, like, it's the night before a tournament. What are you doing to prepare?
Okay, so let me get in a little bit into how the game really works.
How the game works, and then we'll talk about how a tournament works.
Yeah, I mean, well, it all leads into it. So
Yeah.
basically the game is, you're on they just changed the size of the table last edition, so I can't remember. It used to be 6x4, so let's say a 6x4 foot table. You have terrain, so there's rules for all the terrain. But so there's general game rules, and then each army has their own rules, which is called a codex. So every unit has their stats, and the stats basically tell you what you need to roll on the dice to kill something. That's the basic top level idea.
And is that in a book, or is it on the bottom of your piece and don't paint over the rules?
If it was on the bottom, that would be very dangerous. No, they sell them in books.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's what they call a codex, is all the rules for one army.
So you might buy up, you know that you want to build a particular army. So over the next year, you're going to buy the pieces, you're going to buy the models for that army and build up an army for something?
Me personally, I would see what's good.
Okay.
That's what I care about, is what's good on the table. But I will say, we'll sidetrack this. The army I have right now that I play the most is called Eldar. They're basically space elves, but they're like psychic elf people with like good technology. That's the army I've been collecting since 3rd edition. I basically have everything for it. So if something is good, I can probably pull it out of my cases and it'll be ready to go. But if I want to start a new army, I would just see what's good, buy that stuff, and then build from there. So yeah, every book has the rules, and what it is every unit has a points value.
Yeah.
So these guys are really good. They cost 100 points. These guys kind of suck, but they take up space. They cost 10 points or whatever. So a competitive game, and it has been this way for a very long time, is 2,000 points. So all the stuff you bring has to add up or be less than or equal to 2,000 points.
Okay.
All right. So it's like, that's the idea. Yeah.
It's what you do at the beginning of Oregon Trail. You have a budget.
Right.
And you fill... I'm 9 years older than you, so my references are different.
I played tons of Oregon Trail, do not worry.
All right, so you were like, I've got 2,000 points to spend, and I'm going to build the best army I can from the models I have in my collection.
Yeah.
And you have your favorite, you've got your set that this is your trusted army, and you know what they can do, so you maybe even don't have to refer to the book as much.
If I'm in the groove of things, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I could just make a list in my head if I'm really used to it.
Okay. And so each person is building their 2,000 point army, and then you're coming to the table.
Yep.
Okay. And then what? Are there dice?
Yes, there's dice.
Okay.
Everything is measured in inches. So, these guys move 6 inches, these guys move 8 inches. So the whole game moves in phases.
Okay.
So first of all, you deploy everything, you get set up, you only have like a certain area to deploy in on one end, they deploy on the other end. Then we roll off randomly, and whoever wins the roll off goes first. So there's a lot of randomization as far as who gets to do what. So whoever's going first, they move all their stuff. Then they get to do psychic powers if they have them. That's like buffs, debuffs, attacks, things like that.
Okay.
And then they get to shoot whatever they want. So their whole army shoots the things that they want to, because a lot of things have guns, a lot of things have poison things. It's all concepts, but it's the shooting phase. So whatever it wants to shoot, shoots. Then once everything's done shooting, you can charge stuff. So this army's literally going to run up to this guy and try to chop his head off.
Okay.
So you want to position everything in the movement phase, shoot the things you want to, and then some things can charge things and then fight them. There's a whole fight phase after that. So the whole thing moves in phases, but whoever's going first gets to do all that before the other guy gets to do anything.
All right. Okay.
So you have to position yourself in a right way where if you go second, you're not totally screwed. Or if you go first, you can take advantage of it. So there's a lot of that back and forth, that mental gymnastics for like super competitive players that like know all that beforehand.
Okay. And are each of those... So move, shoot, psychic, or move, psychic, shoot. Do you roll do you roll dice before each of those to find out how successful you were?
Yeah, so the idea is anything that happens basically has a probability based on the dice.
Okay.
So these guys are terrible at shooting. They each have a gun, so let's say there's 10 guys, I'm rolling 10 dice, maybe they only hit on 5s.
Okay.
5 plus. So any 5s and 6s, that counts as a hit. And then whoever gets hit, there's also a wounding roll, but I don't want to get too deep into the whole thing. But then let's say I wounded you 4 times, this guy. But then he has a save. He has a 4-up save.
Okay.
So on those 5 dice, he gets to roll 5 dice. Anything on a 4-up, nothing happens. But then let's say he rolls 2 2s, then he gets wounded. So all the stats in the army book basically let you know what you have to roll for stuff to happen.
Okay.
So it's all dice-based to randomize things and to keep things interesting. Because, I mean, if you just had stuff that did whatever it wanted, it would get pretty boring.
Right.
And that's kind of the exciting parts, is like when those crazy improbable things happen, it just feels really fun.
Yeah.
And usually your opponent's like having a great time too, because
people
I know I'm jumping around a lot. Yeah.
People, are you using like a D20, a 6-sided?
It's all D6s. Like basically
D6s.
Everything's
okay.
D6. So that's a normal die.
So you roll a Yahtzee.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, I wish that, like, people recognize when something cool has happened. And that's exciting.
Especially your opponent. So it's funny because you might think your opponent gets mad, but a lot of the times they're like, whoa, that's crazy. I've never seen that. So I do have an example. I actually did go to my first tournament since COVID dropped 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Had a great time, did awful, but it was super fun.
Yeah.
Because I've been so out of practice, but I can still talk about this all day. So
but everybody is.
In my last, that's the good part. So in my last game, we're both 0-2, so we're playing each other. Usually match up similar record. Mm-hmm. So we're like, all right, let's just have a great time. So there was a point where a lot of my shooting had been awful all game. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking like my last possible shots from one of my like vehicles into one of his vehicles. So I've hit him both times. I wound him both times. He fails both his saves.
Okay.
So there's some weapons have a thing called like damage. So he has what's called 12 wounds, which means I have to wound him 12 times before he dies.
Okay.
But some of my guns can do more than 1 wound per shot. So the 2 things I hit with actually did random damage. so it was D6 damage. So
Okay.
the two things that went through, I rolled double sixes. That's all his wounds, and I blew the thing up like the last turn.
Awesome.
So like when
Okay.
stuff like that happens, and he was like, "Whoa, you finally got your shooting back." He's like, you owed on that. You're like, it's funny
Nice.
because like his thing died, but it was such a cool moment that like he didn't care. It was just fun.
I love an environment like that where it's, and I also can imagine just the things that I've done post-COVID, like the adrenaline from being in a room with strangers or people
Yeah,
and
most
then
of them were
like
strangers.
or it's really heightened everything.
Like everyone there was basically just thrilled to be playing again.
Yeah.
And that was a really fun environment for sure.
So I'm curious. I have many gameplay questions.
Please.
So do you when you wound him, all his 12 wounds, does he take that piece off the table?
Yeah, basically anything that dies just gets removed.
Okay. So,
So that helped
that's like
me.
chess.
Yeah, that helped me because then I could move over there. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And not to get too into the nitty gritty, but
What
I actually
else
had.
are we here for? Like,
Well,
why else are you
I
on a
don't know.
podcast to spend an hour talking about your favorite thing, if not to go into the nitty gritty?
Well, the thing is, people ask me about it, and I try not to bore them with weird details. But if that's what you want,
This
then
is
I'll
the
bring
weird
them.
detail podcast.
I will bring the weird details.
Yeah.
So the way the games work in general, so these are competitive games. They
Yeah.
have a set number of missions, and the funny thing is, I'm all over the place here.
Yeah.
But Games Workshop in the last two editions, 8th and 9th, have actually gotten really into embracing like competitive play. And in this recent edition, they've actually released their own what they call matched play rules.
Okay.
Because before, basically anyone who wanted to run a tournament had to use like their own missions, because the missions from Games Workshop always sucked. So
Okay.
competitive missions were always like their own independent thing. A lot of them would use like the big tournaments, like the big conventions rules, because
Yeah.
most people were practicing for that convention. So
Okay.
all the local tournaments would use the same rules because it would actually be more attractive for people to come in. But Games Workshop actually released their own match play rules, and they actually got the guy who used to run what's called the Nova Open, which is in Northern Virginia, Nova.
Okay. Yep.
That was like the biggest tournament around where I am. He actually wrote the missions and helped write the missions for Games Workshop. So now that there's an official set of competitive rules that everyone uses,
And that
it's
are
like-
written by
the company and
Yeah.
by people that are in the competitive scene. So
Yeah.
they're really awesome. So it's really awesome that everyone's on the same page now. So in these missions, you score points by being around objectives, which are
Yep.
usually just like poker chips on the table. Like you have to be within 3 inches of it at the end of your turn to score a point or something.
Okay.
And then there's also things called secondaries, which you can pick 3 out of like a big list to try to like tailor it to what your army does or what your opponent
Okay.
is. So the guy I was playing had a bunch of vehicles, like everything has a keyword. So a lot of his units had the vehicle keyword. And there's a mission for scoring points for destroying vehicles.
So you picked that as a secondary mission.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So that boxcars, which is double sixes, scored me a lot of points. So that was really cool too. So not only did I kill something improbably, it actually scored me points that turn.
And are you tracking your points on paper, or is there an app?
We are currently using paper.
Okay.
So yeah, there
Is
was
it like
an app.
Is it a
yeah.
worksheet, or is it just a piece? Is just a notebook, and you're tallying them?
I personally usually just use a piece of paper, like a
Yeah.
notebook, because you can just do turn by turn what you scored. But
Okay.
some tournaments will provide their own score sheet because they want to keep track of it themselves
Okay.
to like refer back to. So they had their own score sheet that we were using.
Okay. So you've got your paper score sheet, and you have your book that's giving you additional information.
Yeah.
Or you just know your.
Oh, like it's not like out on the table if that's what you're
Okay.
asking.
Yeah.
But if your question is there a lot of extra stuff besides the models? Yes, there is. There's a ton. There's a lot to keep track of.
Right.
If that's that's why I call it a complicated board game.
Yeah.
It's like the way like the rules are and like the interactions and then all the other rules. Then there's like the mission rules. It gets super complicated.
Okay.
But that's what I love about it. I love like learning how the rules interact. Like this guy does this thing, which counteracts this thing, but I actually have this thing, which says you can't do that. So like that kind of stuff is really interesting to me. And that's probably what I like the most about it. Like the game itself is what I love the most.
Yeah.
I only do the painting and modeling so I can play the game.
Okay.
So that's where my focus is. But there's some people that don't ever play the game. Maybe they play twice a year, but they love the models and they paint the models.
Right.
So that's a really big part of this is there's so many different ways that you can enjoy Warhammer, either version. Yep.
Okay. Now am I allowed to ask you what do you do the night before a tournament?
Oh, yes. Sorry. You can ask me whatever I want or whatever you want, but I seem to be answering 4 different questions at a time in my head. So
I love it. Like I said, it's a battle of podcast hosts.
Yes.
Like we are both accustomed to driving the conversation, and so far it's been a delight. So
thank you.
So
yeah,
right,
it's just a lot of info to get through. That's the thing.
I did do a Google image search, and for people listening, I was like, all right, I need help imagining what does it mean that there's terrain, and what is it? So I Googled Warhammer 40K tourney, and then just hit images.
Yeah, you'll probably get a lot of nerds.
Yeah, but it's helping. Like that has helped me visualize what you're talking about.
You have the table. You're on one side. Your opponent's on the other side.
Yeah.
You're chucking dice around. It's great.
Yeah.
So the night before a tournament. So I've probably had my list ready to go for like 2 weeks. So
Okay.
I have
What
to
is
make
on your
sure.
list? So take me
Yes.
2 weeks before the tournament, and you're
Well,
writing your list.
What I mean by list is
Yeah.
army list.
Okay.
So I know what I'm bringing already.
Okay.
Maybe I make a tweak here and there, but I know what I'm going to bring because it's what I practice with. It's what I've talked to my friends about. I've refined my list. It's ready to go. So I have to make sure I have all my models. That's step one. And I have many different cases with a lot of different foam to keep them in, to transport them. These days, almost everything's plastic, so they're not that heavy. Back in the day, they used to be pewter, or they were mostly pewter. They would get pretty heavy, especially if you had like big demons or big bug things. They were just like solid metal, and you could probably crack someone's head open with.
I feel like that's something I saw around different.
Yeah.
Some of my friends, like those pewter figures have a real, and that model airplane that like, you were painting it in the basement, hopefully with a fan or something going, because they're also, at least in the 80s and 90s, it was not a toxic free paint.
No, especially the spray paint. I will admit I was spray painting models in my mom's basement. Probably not the best idea looking back.
Not great.
I'm somehow okay now.
Yeah.
I'm told. So I have all my models ready. These days, a bigger tournament is going to want you to have what's called the 3-color minimum, which is every model has to have at least 3 different colors on it. So
you literally have to paint them to participate.
You have to paint them in the bigger tournaments. If you're just at a local store on a Saturday, you're trying stuff out, you don't want to commit to, you're like, oh, let's see how this works before I really try to paint it.
Yeah.
They usually won't care. They might have like a best painted award to encourage you to paint them, but at a bigger tournament, and what I mean by bigger is like the amount of people, like 100 plus, or maybe like 80 plus, they're going to say 3-color minimum. So that just gives you you have to show you made an effort to bring painted models. Basically, they don't have to look amazing, but they have to not be just like one blue color or something.
And so you don't go to the, I don't know, like the swap meet and get a brand new one because you're like, oh no, I saw that guy has this, I'm gonna go get this one.
Yeah.
And you're not bringing in blanks.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think like a psychopath sometimes. So
blanks.
Yeah.
Blank models. I like it.
Blank models.
Exactly. We call the gray plastic.
Yes.
They're all gray plastic, so that's not what you want. So I have to make sure everything looks nice, everything's painted, I have everything in the bag. And then I check to make sure I have like all the things I need to play the game, which is all the stuff you were asking about before. So you need a tape measure to measure out.
Okay,
yep,
right?
That's a big. If you don't have a tape measure, you're screwed because you got to know the range of stuff. Like this gun only shoots 24 inches. I got to make sure I'm in range. That kind of thing. You need your dice.
So the terrain doesn't have a grid on it.
No, it's all free flow. It's all free form. You can move anywhere you want up to X amount of inches. You can shoot something if you can see it. So the buildings actually matter. The trees actually matter. Like you can hide behind the building, then you can't get shot, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So the terrain is very interactive to the game.
And does the tournament supply the terrain, or is there...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the store will have its own terrain set up. Bigger tournaments, they'll all have all the tables ready to go.
Okay.
Yep. So you just have to bring your models. So make sure you have your tape. Make sure you have your dice.
Yeah.
Make sure you have any books you need just to reference them in case you need to.
Yeah.
So the main rule book, your army rule book, maybe a supplement, because of supplemental rules. There's always rules they're trying to sell. They're always selling something. So you make sure you have all that. If it's a long one, I'm always bringing my water bottle. I'm always bringing snacks because you don't know when you'll get a chance to step out somewhere. What else do I need? Oh, I need like spell cards, stratagem cards, that kind of thing. So they have little cards to actually let you use like different powers. It's more to keep track of them, really.
Okay.
Things like that. So that's what I'm doing the night before, is I'm just making sure I have everything ready to go because I don't want to be scrambling in the morning.
Yeah. And what is the shortest... Okay, so like one-on-one tournament play. What's the shortest amount of time a game has ever ended? And what is the longest... Maybe what is the longest tournament game you've ever played? And what is like the longest Warhammer game you've ever played?
So tournaments will always have a time-limited round.
Oh, well,
because they want to...
That's
yeah,
fun.
sorry. Because they want to make sure... It's not like baseball. They want to make sure you can get your 3 games in and like you're not screwing anyone else over. Because if everyone's waiting for you to finish because they want to start the next round, that's no fun for anyone.
Right.
So rounds these days are usually about 2.5 hours. They used to be 3 because the game would take longer. They've streamlined a lot of stuff in 9th to try to speed things up. The shortest that I've ever played, I guess if you count like conceding because like something terribly went wrong or someone doesn't want to play, is probably like 20 minutes.
Okay.
So there could be a time where someone just like gives up. They're like, I don't feel like playing anymore.
Oh no.
Yeah. But so
how
what
about
happened?
A game where somebody didn't.
Where we actually played it out. Yeah, we actually played it out.
And they had like loaded, like their dice were just on fire or your dice were on fire.
I don't know. In a tournament, maybe like 45 minutes.
Okay.
Where we actually play it out and we realize this is going to end very quickly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely happened.
All right. And then what about in maybe your more like your social side of Warhammer where it's people you know, it's your local store, it's a 5-on-5, like a bigger game, more people. What does that kind of look like?
So I've never really done like the super big apocalypse games.
Yeah.
Apocalypse games. I have a lot of friends who've done them at stores. Like a store will host like a whole game on a Saturday or something.
Yeah.
But one of my friends where I used to live around Delaware would host New Year's Day. Mm-hmm. He'd have what's called Carnage, which is 4 people at a table basically trying to capture the middle. It's like King of the Hill. Mm-hmm. So it's 4 armies all trying to get to the middle at once. And those games will take a long time. Maybe like 6 hours. Each person is
doing move, psychic, shoot.
Right.
Move, psychic. Are those the 3 steps? Move,
psychic, shoot, and fight, basically.
And fight.
Like close combat fighting.
So what are those? So if you're doing close combat fighting and you get all your steps, but does close combat become like roll?
Well, like, if it's my turn, like I'll do all my fighting first, and then my opponent does all their fighting if they have people left, basically.
Okay.
It's all very turn-based. It's like, I want to do all my stuff, you're going to do all your stuff.
Okay. And so when they do all their stuff, when they move, psychic, shoot, close combat, that's when you find out what happened in the close combat you just had.
Technically, no. So even if it's my turn and I charge into you and start fighting you, I get to go first. But even in my turn, if you still have dudes left, you get to fight back. So you can do your fighting in my turn if it's close combat.
Okay, that makes more sense.
That lets them fight back at least because it's happening like right there next to each other.
Okay.
But if that's still going on, like no one's dead, on their turn, we're going to keep fighting again. So that whole blob stays together, and then on their turn, they get to go first, and then I fight back. So it's that kind of thing.
Okay. That is helpful.
That is helpful. There's actually another game that probably took all damn day, meaning like 12 hours, where we had... I guess I lied. I was in kind of an apocalypse game, but it was very... So this is really interesting. He made up his own rules where... this was my old club, which I loved, that had to shut down because the building got sold. But he probably had 8 tables set up with terrain and stuff, but he had what were called like teleport markers.
Ooh.
So if you got your unit onto the teleport marker, you would randomly pop up on a different table. And then
he would just come
there.
and whisper to you and say, like, go to table 7?
No, you dice. It's always dice.
Oh,
you randomly
right.
roll a die. I'm on table 5 now. But then you got to keep track of all your units on different tables, which got insane.
Oh, your whole unit didn't go. Just the.
Not your whole army, just whoever made it to that portal. Yeah.
And were you... But that sounds fun. So you're trying to get to the portal, right?
Yeah, it's super fun. Like, no one was, like, there to win. We were just like, let's see what crazy stuff's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that was, like, an all-day thing. You probably have 10 different people bouncing around tables. It's hilarious.
Oh, because the portal sends you somewhere random every time, it's not just, like, Kyle got a portal to table 6, so now anyone he gets there goes to table 6. Is that every time you get people to the portal, they go to a new table. You go
somewhere else. Yeah, you randomly roll, see where it goes. Yeah, so that's probably the craziest game I've ever been a part of. And that was just a lot of fun.
That sounds really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like one that would take a lot of coffee to get through.
Yeah, probably a lot of soda that day.
Yeah.
People probably brought beers, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I'm curious, thinking about the models.
Sure.
Are there... Like, would you ever go on Etsy and buy a model that someone painted? Would you ever commission someone to paint for you? Or I'm curious, like, is there a market of model painters?
Commissioning, yeah.
Commissioning, yes.
You had the right word. Yeah, commissioning's big. Some people, like I said, only like to paint, or maybe they paint a lot more than they play.
Yeah.
And they've turned that into a little side business.
Okay.
I have bought pre-painted models before, so I've commissioned people to paint models for me. Like I said, I'm not the best painter. I can hold my own. But like, let's say I have like a really cool general or something, and he's a super detailed model. I know I'm going to screw it up, so I'll say to one of my friends who's better, or I'll go online and have a commission say, paint this for me because I know it'll look a lot better if you do it. So I have a few models from one of my armies, have a few characters painted by a friend of mine. I actually went to a company to get... So their last edition, there was a really good, like, what they call detachment. So I didn't get really into how the armies are built, but you have to basically slot your units by type into different detachments.
Okay.
So there was one really good detachment that I could just, like, kind of throw into my army, and it was 3 vehicles and 1 character.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and got that commissioned from a company because I could have them build them and paint them and just ship them to me. So I'm like, I know I want this. I don't want to spend time on it.
Yeah.
Just do it for me. And then I used it for like 2 years. So it was great.
So commissioning and access to models. So like for example, like all of this I just know from like Tumblr memes and following my friends on Twitter and not because I have like So one, I recognize the information I have is secondhand and by osmosis.
Got it.
But how I understand like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon cards is that you buy a pack and you hope the card you're looking for is in that pack.
Yeah.
Or maybe you go on eBay and you buy a specific card.
Mm-hmm.
But in Warhammer, it sounds like you build the army you want and you pick exactly the pieces you want. That it's not a black box hidden, oh man, I got this dude. Like, tell me about so you are selecting the pieces that you want. It's not random.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a barrier. Like, there's the whole pay-to-win question, which is what's big in Magic and big in Pokemon. Because like you said, if there's a super good card, you have enough money, you can just have it. You can just buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously with 40K, you still have to buy everything, but maybe there's like a really new or a really good new thing that can actually become rare. Or even if it's an old thing, like the secondhand market just gets blown out and like you can't find it anywhere. Like that'll happen sometimes. But for the most part, anyone can buy whatever they want as long as they have the money. So yeah, if you're like, I know these 50 models are going to make a great army, you can just go buy them and build them and paint them. I mean, it takes time, but you can eventually have whatever army you want, really.
Cool.
But yeah, there is the concept of things getting rare. So like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there's these things called Dark Reapers, which are in the Eldar army. They just were so good at countering so many different things. They were part of a really good rule set. And then they just became super rare because a lot of people started winning with them, like big tournaments, and then everyone, what's called net listing. You copy whatever's doing good right now, and then everyone wants to buy Dark Reapers. So they were impossible to find. They were sold out on Games Workshop. They were sold out on eBay. You had to like borrow them from your friends. Like it was hard to find. But yeah, there are examples of that happening.
Is that cool and legal to, like, if you and your buddy go to a tournament, is it kosher? Is it ethical for you to have to, like, can you trade middle of the day, or do you go in with a set army for the day?
When you go to a tournament, you have one list for the day. That's it. Or the weekend, whatever. You only have that list. You submit it beforehand. You say, this is what I'm using.
Okay.
So you can't trade in the middle of the day, have a better list later. So the idea is you're bringing your list, you're playing 3 people, you're playing 6 people, and that's it.
Okay.
But if before the tournament you're like, I'll never get this painted and built in time, it's no problem. Just borrow your friends' models. Like, no one cares about that.
But you have to borrow before you submit the list.
Yeah, you have to know,
bring the list you said you're going to bring.
You have to bring what you wrote down or what you printed out. But they don't always have to be yours, no.
Okay.
I'm sure some people would disagree with that. I'm sure there's some old-timers that are like, you must build and paint everything yourself. Like that's been a real big change recently, really, especially with like the secondhand market and people really creating businesses with commissions. Is in a way, you've still dedicated time to it because you had to pay for it. So you had to work to get that money. You had to... You're buying money. You're paying someone to do it. So even if you didn't paint it, it's still your model. You know.
Yeah.
You bought it. So whatever. Yeah, that's really changed recently. No one cares anymore.
Okay. If someone is just starting in Warhammer,
great question.
what do you think is like the budget they set aside for like a basic starter army?
Okay.
Not the best, just like you're just a basic, what's the minimum good army? That's 2 different questions, isn't it?
So you're not going to start out with a 2,000 point army right off the bat.
Okay.
Especially if you're buying it yourself, you're building it up. To get to that point, I mean, it's going to be different by army, but you're spending multiple $100s.
Okay.
Like, minimum. You can probably do better on the secondhand market, like I said, eBay, or buying used models from other people. It's very rare to completely start, like, new out of box an entire army.
Okay.
But eventually you get there. Eventually, like I said, I've been building this up for over a decade, the army I have now, so... But yeah, it's multiple hundreds for sure, especially once you get into the paint, you get into different options, different models. So yeah, GW has been really good recently in getting new people in. Like, they'll have their own starter sets where they'll actually be cheaper than every model added up together. But it's like, here's the set. You can buy these 50 dudes Or you can buy 2 armies in one box, so you at least have another army for someone else to play with. Maybe you split it. You split the money. Yeah. So it's not user entry friendly as far as money, but as far as like building it up and like getting involved, they've done a much better job like getting new people in there. It's a big barrier to entry for sure.
Yeah. And when people, like when you go and play at a store, obviously the store is building community, but working on sales.
Oh, yeah.
Does stores ever have like a sample army? Like if you wanted to, you've got your psychic elves.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other armies? I'm sorry, Spidey is very...
Not a problem. I was wondering if one of them would make an appearance.
Yeah, this is Spidey. So is there another army that you've eyed or that you've borrowed from a friend because you just want to know how this other army plays? Like, do you ever swap armies?
I have sometimes, yeah. It is fun to just say, how does this army really work? And then once you play a game with them, you get a real good understanding, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I stick with what I have.
Okay.
Or if I want to start a new army, I'm starting the collection. So I'm getting the models. So the newest army I started collecting was probably 2 editions ago. And I've built up a pretty good amount of those.
What army is that?
That is called Gene Stealer Cults.
Gene Stealer Cults.
Yes. The idea behind that is there's a different army called the Tyranids. They're basically bug people. Think of like the aliens from Alien.
Yeah, my faves. Yeah.
Yeah. So their basically whole idea is to go and devour worlds and take them over.
Okay.
And they have a certain species called Gene Stealers. And their idea is they will infiltrate a planet.
Yeah.
Infiltrate the humans.
Okay.
And like take them over and start mutating them.
Don't like that.
That's not a great idea.
No.
But the idea of the Gene Stealer Cult army is it's mutated humans that are like really sneaky and can like go underground and stuff. So that's the newest army I've been collecting. And by newest, I mean probably 5 years now.
Okay.
Exactly.
Where is it in population compared to your main army?
Population meaning like how many people use it?
How many models
I have.
How many models are in your main army and how many models are in this new battalion?
I could not possibly count how many models of Eldar I have. I probably could, but off the top of my head, I have no idea. It's a lot.
Is a lot 100? Is a lot 500?
A lot's probably
1,000?
Like, if you're saying individual models, it's probably like 2,000 models.
Okay.
So anywhere from little foot guys to medium tanks to big planes, like a lot.
So
and that might be underselling it. I don't know.
How many pieces, when you pack your army for a tournament, are we talking like a carry-on suitcase? Are we talking a duffel bag?
It's it's like duffel bag sized. It's like maybe a 3 by 2 like box almost.
Okay.
I could it's no use showing you on camera because no one else could see it. But yeah, it's like a carrying case. A lot of people actually think they're gun cases sometimes because they're like all black and they have like zippers and pockets and
you're
stuff.
like, yeah, it's full of guns.
Like, yes, stay away, buddy. But yeah, because like there's actually people that have like had them stolen out of their cars because people think it's like I said, guns or something else. And the funny thing is they're probably just as valuable, honestly.
Yeah.
But the people probably have no idea, and they just like leave them there or like dump them on the street or something, which sucks. But at least they didn't steal them.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually happened to friends of mine.
Oh, what a bummer.
Yeah.
So when you are packing up,
to answer the new one I have, I maybe have like a sixth of the amount of models I have for my main army, because I bought like what I knew was good, and like a few other things so I could like swap things out, but. When I start a new army now, I'm really focused on like what's going to be a good competitive list.
Sure.
So I'm not collecting as much as I'm buying to play. But Eldar at this point,
Eldar is you're a completionist with Eldar.
That's my collection army. Yeah.
Okay.
Especially because over the years, different things have become good.
Yeah.
So I bought those, and new models would come out, so I bought those.
Okay.
So yeah, a lot of those.
Okay, so your main one is like 2,000 plus. Your secondary army, a little bit smaller, or what is a sixth of the size and growing. Mm-hmm. And how many individual pieces do you pack up when you go to a tournament?
So my list, it always varies per army.
Because, it's 2,000 points.
Yeah, so some armies are designed to have like a bunch of little guys.
Yeah.
My army's more what they call elite, which is like more expensive, smaller pieces.
Okay.
So the list I just took was probably, we'll call it 60 models.
Okay.
And that includes like kind of like walking vehicles, like walkers. Like think like ATSTs. So like,
and does a
like,
walker have like a dude on it,
yeah, there's like a pilot inside.
Okay,
yeah. But that's like all part of the model. Like it's all in the model.
Nice.
So there's like 4 of those. 3 little like barrage guns, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So those are like medium size. But then like guys on foot, like the little inch tall guys, I probably had 45 of those.
Okay.
But then I also had dudes on jet bikes.
Nice.
So there's like guys like zooming around on jet bikes because they're like super fast. So I had about 20 of those.
All right.
So that's maybe like 20, 60, yeah, like maybe 70 models.
Okay. 2 questions. You can pick which one you want to answer or answer them both.
Sure.
Do people like, are there Twitch channels where people like, do you ever watch people play Warhammer, or is it only interesting when you play yourself?
So this is a much more recent phenomenon. I'm saying a lot of things are more recent, and when I say that, probably the past 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
Because the game's so old, recent time means like the past 3 or 4 years. And that's when, like I said, Games Workshop got much more involved in like the competitive scene. They'd be more supportive of like rules changes and doing their own competitive rules, things like that. There are some people where 40K is their job, literally their job. So they've built up notoriety by winning big tournaments, and just by like being good players and like knowing what's good. So they'll offer coaching services.
Okay.
Where they'll actually talk to you about like your army, how to use it. They'll build lists for you, or they'll help you build a list. Like, this is the choice I would make. This is this here. And they'll do like demo games. They'll play games on Twitch. Like Twitch is huge, or YouTube, or whatever. So yeah, that's a big thing now, is there are like professional coaches who are offering games and stuff.
Do you have like an Excel spreadsheet where you have like how would a coach advise you on building your army? Would you do a FaceTime and show them your shelves and they would say, "Oh, grab that dude"? Or do you have an Excel do you have a spreadsheet or a database that they would pull from? Like,
so there's only so many units for each army, right?
Yeah.
So most of the time, I've never done it myself, but I've heard it described. They'll do a FaceTime, they'll do a Zoom meeting, they'll do a one-on-one convo. And it could always go different levels. They'd be like, I want to make the best list I can with Blood Angels, which is a Space Marine army. So they'll tell you, make me a Blood Angels list. I don't care what's in it, as long as it's only Blood Angels, right?
Okay.
So they'll be like, okay, this is like the best list you can make with Blood Angels now. Maybe they will ask, what do you have already? Maybe that's part of the parameter. They'll be like, this is the 3,000 model collection I have. I just need to use what's here. So they'll build the best list out of that. But they'll talk to you. They'll work with you. Like, what's your real goal?
Yeah.
Like, do you want the best list ever possible now? Or do you want, like, the best list with, like, your favorite stuff in it, you know?
Yeah.
Because everyone approaches it different ways. So that's part of it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So they'll be like, I'm starting a new army. What should I buy? That kind of thing.
Okay. Do you ever think about like trying to play at that level?
That's always the dream, right?
Yeah.
That's always the dream. It does take a lot of time and a lot of travel.
Yeah.
So in its heyday, probably 2019, I would say, is probably like the peak of 40K. 2018, 2019, around 8th edition, which is when it really got good. As far as competitive play.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that was probably like the peak. And you could go, if you wanted to, depending on how far you wanted to go, you could go to a tournament every weekend.
Okay.
You could probably go to a major tournament, which is like 60 plus people twice a month, probably. Mm-hmm. Anywhere in the country. So I would not have the time to dedicate to that.
Sure.
I was never like an amazing player. Like I could always find the things I'm good at, or I could find a list I'm good at. There's always going to be someone better. At my peak, I was probably like, I was always above 500, let's say. So by like winning percentage.
Okay.
Like in a tournament. So 2-1 was like that was my big record. I occasionally won like a local tournament.
Yeah.
Which is just winning all your games, but it wasn't a lot. So I knew my own limitations.
Yeah.
If I dedicated more time to it, studied other armies, things like that, maybe. But at that point, you're basically dedicating your entire life to it.
Yeah. And then when would you podcast?
I was not. Yeah. When am I supposed to talk about? When am I supposed to talk about Shaq Fu? Like,
right.
Someone's got to do it. But no, I always knew I was never going to be like the best player. Like even in my area of like my group of 20 friends, like we always knew like the 3 guys that were the best.
Yeah.
I was probably a step below them, you know?
What do you think are the like strategic skills? Is it that they have like really good, like they can do a mental map and they can like really map it all out like in their head? Like what makes somebody, what do you think? What do you suspect other than wealth makes somebody play at that level?
So it's definitely, there is definitely a type of mind that's built for it.
Yeah.
Of just knowing probabilities on the fly, knowing interactions on the fly.
Yeah.
It's if you have, honestly, a big part of it is experience. Like if you literally know what every army does, you can have a plan for every possible scenario.
Yeah.
So like some of the best players just know that. Like they've played that many games, they've talked about it that much, they've studied it that much, where they just know everything basically. I could never get to that level because I would just get bored. I want to do other things.
Yeah.
But so that is part of it, and part of it is just having a mind for it. There's one guy who doesn't always play like the popular thing, but he'll make like a super weird list that like no one's ready for. And it just counters everything perfectly. He knows perfectly how to use it, and like he's thought of every scenario. He's like, I know what each thing's going to do when.
Yeah.
And he's just really good at it. Or there's people that do play the most popular thing.
Yeah. But
they just know it so well, and they know everything else so well that they can take it to the top.
Okay.
So it is, a lot of it is pre-game, like knowing what everything's going to do. But in-game is super important too, because everything is so random. You never know what your opponent's going to do. They could literally move anywhere. They could do something. So you have to, in-game, be able to limit your opponent to what you're basically allowing them to do. That's like the top level play, is playing in a way where you're not just accomplishing your goals, you're preventing your opponent from doing what they want to do also. Like that's like real top level play. Okay. So you're thinking steps ahead for both you and your opponent, and that's like what the real super competitive people can do.
Huh.
And I don't have the brain for it. Like I'll get like either overwhelmed or confused, or like I just can't think that fast, like that kind of thing. Because you're also on the clock. Like that's the thing with these tournaments. You have to finish in 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Or
you're screwed. So that's part of it too, is being able to do that on the fly and think that quickly and know everything and have everything running.
Right.
Like, I don't have the mental capacity to do it. So I know I'll never be that top level player.
I totally get that.
But I try my best.
Yeah. What is the thing that you haven't said yet, that if we end this podcast and you haven't been able to say this thing, what is it? Like, what is the Warhammer, like, either pitch or here's this other thing what's the other thing you had on your list to tell me about that I didn't ask about because I don't have the imagination to get there?
Could I do 2 things?
You may do 2.
So the big thing is I want to emphasize the social side of it.
Yeah.
Because people see the nerd store, people see the models, are like I said, it's some dude painting models in his basement, arguing about rules with his one friend. But all those friends I've made post-college are basically through Warhammer.
Yeah.
Because it is so communal, it is so social. You're talking to someone for 4 hours maybe you're only talking about the game, but you're getting to know them, you're making jokes, you're having fun.
Yeah.
You have gaming clubs that are like just like a bunch of people that want to play competitively, so they play each other, they talk about the game, and you become friends. So the social aspect of the hobby is like super big, and that's part of why I'm still doing it and why it's still so fun to do. And something a big thing I lost in the past year is just that interaction and that like just having a great time. Concept of it, or what is it? Perception. The perception of the game has changed recently into like, obviously you can't play it unless you have another person across from you. So like that's step one, is finding someone else to play. So you do have that social side of it. You do have the friends group. You go to a tournament with like 4 other people. You go get dinner afterwards. You talk about the games you had. Like, it's like that's like such. I could go 0-6 at a tournament, but if I'm with my friends and we're all having a good time, and maybe one of them's 5-0, they're in the final table, we're all rooting them on. Like that's such a good, fun aspect of it. Is it? That's just like an aspect of it that I love. Is just that most people wouldn't think about it like outside of the hobby. So that's something I really want to emphasize, is like how much of a group like fun thing it can be.
So that's one.
Yes.
There's community.
Yes.
2.
Second thing I want to say is Games Workshop isn't the only company out there. There's so many different tabletop games. So even if you don't want to buy 100 models, there's a lot of smaller games you could get into. There's War Machine, Malifaux. There's like World War II games, Flames of War. Mm-hmm. There's other sci-fi games. There's Drop Zone Commander. So there's so many different games out there at smaller scale. So that might be a more fun intro, is you only need 5 models, you know?
Yeah.
And your opponent only needs 6. So you could have it might be a better way to get entry into it. But yeah, that's something.
What's the thing? I'm going to link to all of this in the show notes.
Oh, sure.
But what's the thing? Do people, what do you Google to get to the list or to get to the articles that are like top 5? Is it tabletop model games?
Oh, tabletop wargaming is what you would Google.
Okay, great.
And honestly, I would say find your local game store. I'm sure a lot of them are opening up now. And my best advice is pick the army you think is the coolest. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how competitive they are. If you have fun with your army, and if this is an army that appeals to you, then you're gonna want to play. Like even if they're the worst army out there, eventually they'll get better.
Look, people love the Cleveland Browns.
Exactly, that's
Aren't
your team.
They historically a bad team?
They're very bad most of the time.
Yeah, and the Jets, and the Bears, all of them.
But yeah, if you're looking to get into a game, don't worry about what's good right now, because it's gonna change in 2 months anyway.
Yeah,
you know, they're always releasing updates and stuff. So definitely get the army you think looks the coolest and appeals the most to you, and you're gonna have a great time.
Fantastic. Kyle, is there anything you would like to promote? Do you want people to find you on the internet?
I'm not that big on socials, but like we said before, I'm co-host of A New Low. That's like a general chat show where we talk about the week that was, disappointments and encouragements. And you can go to anewlow.co to find that. And it's also on every podcast feed search you can do. If you like Hamilton, search for Who Does a Podcast. That's, again, our weekly... every week we cover a different song. We're almost at the end. But all our old shows are there, too, so you can start from the top if you want to.
Yeah, people don't have to wait.
Exactly.
They can do a rewatch.
It's almost there.
It's almost there.
It's almost finished.
Yeah. Do a rewatch of Disney, of the cast of the movie, and then dive in. And
then hop right in.
Yeah.
That's probably what I'm proudest of. I really love that show. I don't know why, but
that's great.
I think we do a great job. And like I said before, my old podcast, which we don't do new episodes of, but all the old episodes are still available, is Your Parents' Basement. I think only the last 100 or so are available on feeds, but we have the entire archive on our website, ypbpodcast.com. So if you're into classic video games, check that out.
Kyle, thank you so much. This has been a blast. Have a good night.
Thank you. It's been great. You have a good one.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.